Welcome to this CNBC Africa special. Now, a few months ago, we all know the world was faced with one of the biggest crises that we have seen since the Second World War. We also saw one of the largest donations that's ever been given by a public corporation for the common good. I am talking about the $25 million donated by MTN Group to the African Union in its effort to try to stem the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the studio with me today, we have Ralph Mupita, is the CEO of MTN, to talk about that and to talk about everything telco. Ralph, welcome.
Thank you for having me on the show.
I want to talk, Ralph, about what motivated you to stand up and say we are contributing to the global effort and the Pan-African effort that we saw to try to make sure that you are part of the drive to prevent the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah, thanks, Godfrey. I mean, from an MTN perspective, we've been working with African Union CDC for some time. And, during the first wave and coming through the second wave, one of the issues we've been looking at has been this, what can we support, all the efforts around, COVID-19 in terms of empowering our people with communication tools in particular. And more specifically, we're looking at the idea of the digital travel passport. And in that discussion, they did update us that quite a lot of progress had been made in securing sufficient vaccines for the general population to try and get to herd immunity for the 55 member states. And part of the communication and interaction was that most of these vaccines would reach the shores of the African markets only in March, but that they had acquired 7 million doses, which would be targeted specifically for healthcare workers, which could arrive in February, and that there was a need to provide some financial support for that. And the check size for that was $25 million. So they asked us if we would step in, as there was a need, to accelerate bringing vaccines on. And, we applied our minds and we felt that this was the right thing to do. So that was the engagement that we had with the AU.
And the next question, of course, then has to be, how do we make this sustainable? In other words, so that it doesn't become a one-off. Is there opportunity here, in your view, to get the private sector to be an intrinsic part in trying to make sure that the continent is safe, and to perhaps even go better and say this becomes part of the norm going forward?
No, for sure. I mean, we are facing an unprecedented, massive broad-based program to vaccinate, certainly at least about 700 to 780 million Africans to get to herd immunity. I think if you work with the numbers, you've got 1.2, 1.3 billion people on our continent. And as the specialists will tell us, health experts will tell us, to really, defeat COVID, we need kind of herd immunity across all countries, pretty much across the globe. But if we stick to the African continent, that's about 780 million. So it's going to require concerted effort, both public and private sector. I mean, the health sector, both public and private, has a very critical role, obviously, to drive the vaccination and vaccination programs. But allied industries such as telecommunications can play a role across the value chain, bringing our communication tools, the digital infrastructure, to track and trace, people as they get vaccinated, etc. So I think there is that role where the public sector and the private sector need to come together to figure out how do we, rapidly deploy these vaccines and leveraging the skills and capability. Now, in terms of monetary contribution, as we did, every company needs to apply its own mind and whether it's right for them or not. But I would argue that knowing that many of the African markets have got fiscal challenges, we felt that this was a good thing to do. Ours is a very narrowly focused initiative focused at Africa's 3.5 million healthcare workers. We think that it's a good start to start with the healthcare workers, then work with those who are much more elderly, and then work through the other risk categories of individuals. So I think broadly that there is a space for the private sector both to support financially to the extent they can, but more importantly, in the core business that they run.
Yeah, quickly on this one, cynics will say, of course, you have a vested interest in ensuring that people are safe and that you are seen to be doing something for the common good. How do you balance that side of it, and also investors who are saying we are looking for the highest returns possible? I'm playing devil's advocate here.
No, you're playing devil's advocate very well. I mean, my points would be that, for sure there will be a level of cynicism, to these sorts of initiatives, but we feel it's the right thing to do. I think the role of business in society more broadly, goes beyond delivering shareholder returns. It's an and. We do need to, focus on shareholder and shareholder value creation. But I think, business today has a purpose beyond the, production of profits. I think there's a narrative that's building, more broadly around, that, businesses have responsibilities to broad stakeholders. And the stakeholders include staff, includes your customers, includes shareholders, regulators, governments, nation states. So I think business has actually transformed in the last couple of years. And actually COVID and the crisis situations it has created has forced businesses to actually introspect around their role and responsibility. Saying all of that, I mean, I think the point around, seeking, profits through sustainability becomes, super important. So we're not choking away from our responsibilities to shareholders, but, with any initiative where, you need to be bold, there will be people who will be cynical with regards to that. But, as MTN, we're comfortable with the decisions and the positions that we've taken.
Yeah, it's an important point you make around ESG, because certainly this is becoming part of a larger conversation. In fact, I remember last year our chairman here talked about the need for us to define the purpose of the business, and we know this is becoming really an important component, and many are saying that COVID-19 has brought this to the fore. But do you find the partners that you require for you to work on this journey available across the African continent? You operate in many geographies, so I'm asking really here from a pan-African perspective, as well as from the national entities where you operate in, if you're finding the understanding from the authorities that a healthy business makes for a healthy economy and, of course, a greater good for the whole of the population.
No, Godfrey, we're certainly seeing that. And if I just use the example of how we've worked with the AU, as I mentioned, we started working with the AU CDC, John Nkengasong and his team, looking at, how do we develop this digital passport. You and I are probably used to walking around with our yellow fever certificates, the paper-based one, which are torn at the edges. I think in time to come, that's going to be a digital certificate. So we're working with them to figure out how do we, partner them and other telcos and other, digital companies to develop these initiatives. But we then, moved to work with the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Task Force, which is led by Strive Masiwa, and has, ministers of health there from South Africa, Nigeria, Rwanda. They're all part of that task team. And it's been, fairly seamless. Now, it's an example of, how the public sector and private sector can work towards achieving common objectives. And across the operations, I think we're seeing, the attitudes towards embracing public and private partnerships, the so-called social contracts, beginning to pick up, because I think governments and individuals and companies understand that we're never going to, have sustainable growth across the markets, across the continent, if we don't bring the best to bear of business as well as the public sector. So I'm very encouraged by the progress we're seeing across markets.
Yeah, I asked this question, of course, in the year that the Africa Continental Free Trade Area was launched on January 1. For many people, a very important landmark in trying to fulfill the dreams of our fathers from way back in 1963. I want to talk about the role of the telcos in getting the services and the products that we need to move across the African continent. Your thoughts in terms of what role you play, and also please tell me if you have seen anything at all that resembles a kickstart from the beginning of the AFCFTA.
No, it's early days yet, and this was officially kicked off the 1st of January, and I think when the 1st of January date was set, I mean, I don't think any of us thought we would be in the midst of COVID. So I think the fact that the free trade area must commence and pushing out its own objectives, as you say, we go all the way back to 1963. I think it's an important and necessary step in Africa's own development. I think it's a common cause that Africa's strength will come in its numbers: 1.2, 1.3 billion. Single market will be the biggest market there is. So that vision and the aspiration of 2063 is important for us to deliver. Now, for sure, there will be challenges along the way, and COVID has set some challenges about how speedily we can bring some of these barriers down, tariff and non-tariff barriers, and improve intra-Africa trade. But I think it's we're basically a month since the start. But I think we will need to give this all our attention, both governments and the public sector, and know that it's not going to be a simple journey. It will be quite a challenging journey, because specific countries will have specific issues and challenges that they need to overcome.
Yeah, you're a very good example of a company, of course, that will know if AfCFTA is working, because you operate across a number of geographies on the African continent. And in my interactions with CEOs and business people in general, one of the key questions that keeps coming back is the issue around regularization of regulation across the different geographies. Is that something that you are seeing? Is there more that needs to be done to ensure that there is this commonness that makes it easier then for companies such as yours to operate in Rwanda, in Egypt, in South Africa, in Nigeria?
No, for sure, Godfrey. We need much more regulatory harmonization across markets, because every market you go into, there are some very specific and important regulatory issues that you need to deal with. But if you're a multinational like MTN, you've got to understand country by country those specific issues, and it makes business obviously a little bit more complex and costly than it otherwise would be. So there is for sure an opportunity to harmonize a lot of the regulations, whether it is roaming, creating across the African continent much more kind of homogeneous kind of roaming regimes, so people kind of roam like home. I think that's certainly something that will come through as the free trade area, builds up. I think, just simple things like license renewals. These are very different country from country, and sometimes, they're, you're basically looking at two different bookends of, license renewals when you're looking at country X to Y. So regulatory and kind of legislative harmony across markets will, take a lot of the cost and the speed of executing, and particularly when we look at telecommunications or the digital services type businesses, more harmonization across, will certainly be, very, very helpful.
How big an opportunity do you think, Ralph, the African Continental Free Trade Area is? Because one of the other themes that I keep finding is that people speak about how we are moving markets to the digital world, and how this could be a game changer across a continent such as Africa, where we've got these huge distances between us.
Now, look, from a telecommunications and digital infrastructure perspective, there is actually a lot of scope for massive transformation and accelerating, the growth of the African continent. I think a lot of infrastructure has been put in place for the last 20 years to enable people to communicate, to collaborate, and actually now utilize the digital services. The more we have, back to the point of kind of regulatory harmonization, as well as common goals. I think the common goals of connecting Africans to the internet and the benefits of the internet are super important, and I think COVID-19 has exposed that. I mean, in areas such as agriculture, in health, in education, and in e-commerce. And I think we've seen, the uptick of e-commerce across our various markets. So, these things can actually accelerate the growth of the free trade area. And the telcos, across the market, certainly MTN, very well prepared and prepared to make the investment to bring these things to the fore.
Yeah, that was my next question around your readiness to be a part of this and to facilitate this. And I wanted to ask about your capex plans for the continent, as well as, of course, the key markets where you operate in Nigeria, South Africa, etc.
No, we've got our capex plans remain relatively robust. For the last couple of years, we have kind of communicated to the market that we spent probably $2 billion of capex to roll out our networks and improve the coverage and capacity for our customers so that they can actually, get the best of the internet and the digital services that sit on top of the internet. So we'll spend $2 billion approximately for the next couple of years. And that's probably spent, 1/3 South Africa, 1/3 in Nigeria, and then the other third across the rest of our markets. So, we want to have fully invested networks, and, we certainly are prepared to continue with the investment across our various markets.
Yeah. Characterize the kind of trends that you have seen since the COVID-19 pandemic struck. We know, of course, about a year ago, we were all confined from our homes, and we suddenly started seeing a surge in terms of data spend. I just wanted to get an idea from the markets that you operate in, what kind of trends you picked up.
Yeah, so a couple of the trends are we've seen data usage go up, as you quite rightly point out. As people start to work more remotely, work from home, we've seen anywhere between 70 to 100% increase in data traffic. So that's really as a function of the remote working. Actually, we've seen voice revenues actually also stay relatively robust. There was a sense that voice would become a communication platform of the past, but actually we've seen it fairly resilient across markets. But I think it goes to it probably should have been expected because people are calling their loved ones, checking up on them during these difficult times of COVID. We've seen gaming and video also on the increase. People must be entertaining themselves at home. So it's a small part of our business today, but we're seeing it having relatively fast growth. And obviously, the other area that we see picking up obviously is on the mobile money transaction side. So we have a sizable mobile money business that has over 45 million subscribers using financial services on our networks, and that has also grown in absolute number of users as well as transaction. So very much an acceleration towards the digital economy is what we've seen in the last couple of months.
Yeah, I want to talk about your main markets now. You have had your headaches in Nigeria, and I think you have solved a large part of them. Is that behind you now, do you think?
I mean, I often get asked this question, which really is a question about 2015 SIM registration fine. And we did have the matters in 2018 of the CBN, the dividend repatriation, as well as the tax matters. The dividend repatriation tax matters and the 2015 fine, all matters in the past. And we believe we have a very good and constructive relationship, with the authorities in Nigeria. Carl Toriola, who's our new CEO in Nigeria, is also got a very important role to build out with the Nigeria board, the relationships on the ground with the authorities. But I would argue that our relationship are as good as in any market, to be honest, mindful that there's always a distance between a corporate and the regulatory authorities, and it needs to be so, for a proper functioning society. Yeah. So in Nigeria, I mean, we have done quite a lot to rebuild and to strengthen, boards and we have fresh management coming in the form, as I mentioned earlier, of Carl Toriola as the new CEO.
Absolutely. And your other key market, of course, is here in South Africa, where we know there is certainly a lot of talk now about the spectrum, the 5G spectrum, and the rollout of it. A year ago, I remember the president speaking about this as one of the key things that he would be driving. I want your thoughts on how this is likely to pan out, given the recent court action that we saw from yourselves, and also the call from everybody, business, the government, that we need this spectrum allocated as soon as possible.
Yeah, we share in the narrative that the high demand spectrum must be released as soon as possible through the auction process. So that goes without any questions. And we're fully supportive and behind the government's effort to drive this as part of the strategic and reform agenda that the country has. So the support there from an MTN perspective is without question. The issue we have is a very narrow matter, which really relates to, the so-called opt-in round in the auction process, as well as the 3500, which is the so-called golden spectrum for which 5G, would broadly be delivered on, or 5G technologies would broadly be delivered on. And in this auction process, there's 86 megahertz that's available. Our view, which we put through in our court papers, has been that the 3500 and the opt-in round shouldn't be in the opt-in round. And if that issue is resolved, I mean, we would withdraw our court action immediately to keep the timeline on. So ours is a very, very narrow issue. It's important that operators have enough 5G spectrum to be able to meet the country's aspirations for the fourth industrial revolution. And that is a point that we are trying to make in our court case. But as I mentioned, Godfrey, ours is a very narrow issue, predominantly around the opt-in round and the 3500 golden spectrum for 5G potentially being that, and us as MTN not being able to participate or bid for that 3500 spectrum.
Yeah, I want to look forward, Ralph, and I know our time is running out. I want to look forward a little bit and talk about an MTN of the future. You, of course, are coming to into your second, well, the first year is coming to an end, and you will be going into your second year as a CEO, but you're no stranger to MTN. You've been there for a while before as a CFO. I want to try to understand what kind of MTN will look like in the future. Some would say this would be more in your own making because you would have had the time to build it the way you want.
No, MTN is fundamentally a connectivity business. We connect over 270 million odd subscribers across the markets, and we started to provide the digital services that sit on top of that connectivity, whether it's financial service through mobile money or instant messaging platforms like Ayoba. So I think going forward, what you will certainly see is, and we've articulated some of these aspects already, which is, we are focusing on Africa. So we're going to have an orderly exit of our Middle East markets. These are great businesses, but we believe that over time, these will be in better hands other than MTN Group. But that exit is going to be a very orderly one. So we focus on the African continent. I think on the African continent, you'll see us continue to push out connectivity solutions to ensure that the broad base of Africans have access to affordable communication across the markets we operate in. But I think you'll also see us providing more of the digital services that sit on top of that connectivity, financial services, the digital services, etc. And we'll see a transformation of the business that has got connectivity and digital services that are developed and delivered for Africans for their consumption. I think that's the shift that you will certainly see in the next couple of years.
Yeah. How are you going to be doing that, Ralph? Because we know for the past few years, MTN has been, how shall I put it, masticating, if you like, all these different bits and pieces that it has been putting together over the past few years. Is that process done in terms of digesting that? And also, is there room on that table for perhaps getting in more acquisitions?
Yeah, look, I mean, at a portfolio level, I think what you'll also see from MTN is that, we're very focused on strengthening our balance sheet. We've spoken about our asset realization program where we are looking to sell non-core assets and with that cash, reduce the gearing at the group level, but also look to invest. So we certainly anticipate that over the while, there may be markets that we believe we need to look into. We've spoken in the past that we would like to consider and are busy evaluating markets such as Ethiopia, and there'll be other markets that we would look at. But I think our focus will be Pan-African. Our focus will be to deliver communication solutions to Africans. And I think, as I mentioned up front, we would also be focusing on the digital services that sit on top. I think many telco operators missed in the last 10 to 15 years the ability to deliver what now we call over-the-top solutions like your Facebooks, etc. We believe that there's an African set of solutions that we can develop and bring to market in the next short while.
Absolutely. Ralph, it's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
Ralph Mupita is the CEO of MTN Group, with where they have been and where they are going. Thank you for joining us. Until next time, goodbye.